Hi, welcome to Create with Chris. I am Chris Haughey, and today I'm going to be painting this adorable Easter Bunny box. I am using a paper mache box, and because it is so porous, it needs sealed really well with multi-surface sealer. I've made a line drawing of the design on a piece of transfer paper, just tracing it onto the surface of the box with graphite paper and my stylus. And I did leave a little space on the end where I placed my finger just to keep it in place while I finished tracing the design. Using light buttermilk and a filbert brush to put on the first coat. I did speed this up really fast because the box is so dark and the paint is so light. There are quite a few layers of paint that need to be applied to get a nice, smooth, opaque coat. Putting on my second coat, and you can see how much brighter that is becoming. But white, and in this case light buttermilk, does take quite a few coats to get a nice, smooth, even coverage. I'm using my radical round to get in those little corners, and also for the bigger areas I switched over to a 1/2" angle. I love the heat tool to dry it with because it is so super hot. It does a fantastic job. Loaded the toe of my brush with Aqua Sky. I'm just floating around the outside edge of the bunny. Gives a little more dimension and a little more interest to the background. Again, another layer of light buttermilk, and oftentimes once it dries you'll be able to tell if it needs one more layer or not. I do not put paint on really thick and heavy. I really like a nice thin coat. I think you get much better results. Loaded my radical round with cotton candy to paint the inside of the ears. And as you can see, I put the paint on, clean my brush with water, and then just use the wet brush to kind of move that paint. It creates kind of a hollow area in the center, making the edges just a little more intense or darker. It's kind of watery, so I have to dry it well. I loaded a little bit of fawn on the toe of my angle brush to float around the outside edges of the bunny on each side of that inner ear. That's just going to give a little more depth on it. And make sure you float that out nice and soft. We're not painting a stripe, it's just a soft blend. And I use the clean area of my brush just to kind of walk it out and create that really soft fade from the shadow to the light buttermilk. And you can always go back and add more color. It's so much easier to add another layer as opposed to trying to clean it off. Now I'm going to increase the intensity of the inner ear, and I'm using Wild Berry. I'm going to shade right underneath that where the ear folds over and around down each side of that inner ear. And look how that makes it recede. Just gives a little more color to it. And again, take a look at it. You'll be able to tell if you need more paint. Don't try to put so much on at one time. Dry it really well, and then you can tell because it does change a little bit of shade as it dries. I am adding some Snow White. I wanted a white bunny, not a brown bunny, so I went in with a little bit of the Snow White to brighten that left side. My light source comes from the left, but I wanted that to be really bright on his little ear where it folds over. And then I'll take a bigger brush and highlight the center of his face. I want his face to be bright as well. Just softly blend it into the sides. I scooted my finger across to, it's a nice blending tool as well. I was going to put a little fawn under the ears, but I didn't like the way that looks, so I'm going back with some more Wild Berry just to make that a little bit darker. I wanted that to really look like it's a shadowed area. And I think that the ears look pretty good. So we're going to give it another quick dry. And then we are going to go in, and I just cleaned up the edges. You're never finished until you're finished. So if you see something that needs a little touch up here or there, take time right then to go ahead and do it. I'm going to trace on just the outline of the eyes and the nose. Again, I'm using my graphite paper and stylus. I always trace the shapes just a little bit smaller, so when I paint, I can cover up the tracing marks. That way, don't have to as much to erase. I am getting a little bit of soft black, and I'm going to use the handle end of my brush, and I'm dot, and then kind of make a little circle, and then drag it up. And it ends up being like a little pear shape, but it's really super easy to get both eyes the same size. Grabbing my Radical Round to base coat the nose cotton candy, one nice smooth coat. Make sure you keep your hand out of the eyes. When you dip dot like that, the paint is just a little bit thicker and takes longer to dry. Once that is dry, we can go ahead and start adding a little more detail onto those facial features. When you're working with anything with eyes, you want to make sure that they really stand out. The nose, look how much better this looks just with that little bit of float of wild berry along the bottom and up the right side. Now I'm getting just a touch of spa blue with my awesome angle and floating along the bottom and up the right side of the eyes. Always add that little dip dot of Snow White. It's the sparkle that brings life in the eye. Highlight the nose with Snow White, and then go back and add a stronger highlight up on the top of the nose. Right there. And I did use my stylus to dip, dot, and then drag it over. You're going to get that perfect comma stroke. He needs little rosy cheeks. I'm using my number 4 Spectacular stencil brush to get the cheeks to look the same. I work on them at the same time. I don't do one and then do the other. I do both of them at the same time, build them up equally, and then they'll always balance each other out. Now make sure when you do dry brush the cheeks, because I wiped most of the paint out on a paper towel. Just be patient because it does build up slowly, so don't try to rush it. I always try to take a time during the process to erase any graphite lines. That way you don't have to worry about missing them later on. A little bit of fawn on the toe of my angle brush. Create a little shadow around the nose and the eyes. Don't get too much under the eyes because he looks really tired if he has too much darkness under his eyes. But I shaded around his nose and down that little mouth center stripe. Just softly blend that in. And this is another one. You can go back and add more if you need more too. I did a little bit where his eyebrows are going to go because I want a little shadow there. Just keeps his face from looking too flat. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I wasn't crazy about the eyebrows, so I went in with a clean brush. They were kind of Groucho marks, just a little bit too much. So I went in with a clean brush and toned them down just a smidge. I have my Epic script liner. I've loaded it with lamp black and thinned it down with water so I can get a nice thin fine line. Add a few eyelashes. I'm also going to go in, make sure you have to get the paint loaded correctly. If it doesn't just slide easily off your brush, it's not loaded correctly. And there, that works out. Didn't care for those, so I wiped them off. I was going to edit this out, but I wanted you to see that there's nothing you can't fix. So once I wipe those off, I'm going to go back and just put a little bit of a smaller, finer. There's his little mouth. Get those eyebrows. They were just too much for that little bunny. Next, we're going to add some whiskers, and I'm using the lamp black and my Epic script liner. Need to make sure it's loaded correctly so that paint's just going to roll right off of the brush. I always do the left side first because I'm right-handed. It's easier for me to see when I add the other side on. That looks pretty good. And a little bit of a freckle. I'm using soft black for the freckles. I didn't want those quite as intense as the whiskers and the eyelashes. So I think that looks pretty good. Give it a really good dry. We're just about finished with the face. So now I decided I wanted to sprinkle some flowers around the outer edge and put some of his ears. I'm using the Itty Bitty Floral Stencil, which is available at Cupboard Distributing and will be listed below. All the supplies will be listed and are available at Cupboard Distributing. To stencil, you need to load your brush, wipe off the excess on a paper towel, and then when your stencil is in place, tap or swirl, whatever your preference is. Too much paint, you are not going to get sharp, crisp lines, and that's where most people get frustrated with stenciling. I did create a line of stencil brushes, my Spectacular stencil brushes. They do have a very soft bristle. I love these. They're so much easier to work with. It doesn't scratch the paint on, it just applies it very softly. Now I did go in and lay the flowers in first, and you can see how it all comes together, but I just wanted to put the flowers in for placement so I know where everything's going to be. It's going to take at least a couple coats of paint to get a nice opaque coverage. It's always so much better to do one or two coats, or to do 2 or 3 coats as opposed to one heavy coat. If you struggle with stenciling, that's probably the main reason, too much paint on the brush. Now to create these lighter purple flowers, I just took my dirty brush, picked up a little bit of Snow White, blended it in, and just let that create a lighter shade of purple. Now that I have my flowers in place, I'm going in to add the leaves. I have a number 6 filbert, and I'm loading one side with foliage green, the other side with Hauser medium green. Touch it on my palette to blend it together so that I have a nice soft blend. I'm going to touch down, twist, and pull out. Creates a perfect leaf shape. And I want to add these leaves in, and these are the leaves for the bigger flowers. And you notice I'm keeping the light color towards the top and the bottom color of the leaf towards the bottom. I'm adding the leaves before I finish the flowers because I want them behind the flowers. And by stenciling the flowers first, I know exactly where my leaf placement is going to be. Just lay it down, kind of twist and pull out. And you can work with them. One stroke doesn't have to be it. You can go in and fuss over them a little bit if you're not happy with them. And I add a couple of the bigger leaves around each one of the larger flowers, which in this case are the pink ones. No right or wrong placement. Just make sure that you get a nice even balance. So you don't want a whole bunch of them in one place and fewer over in another place. It makes it a little bit off balance. And once we get those in there, I'm getting a little more paint. This is pistachio green. It's a much, much lighter color. And I'm working on these smaller leaves next. And I'm getting just a touch more of that Hauser medium green. And I am going to use my Radical Round, which is a beautiful brush. It's a brush I designed with a sharp point. It has a nice big fat belly. Oh, I'm going in this time to add just a little bit of line work for the veins and the stems, to pop that in there real quick on those leaves. So they are connected. Okay, now I'm going in with my Radical Round. Oh, no, I'm putting some stem work on so I know where to put my leaves. I want to do the smaller leaves next, and I decided to do the stems on them so I know placement. That one was going the wrong direction. Wipe it off and put it back in. If you work quickly, you will have plenty of time to just remove anything that you're not happy with. The Epic Script Liner is a super 18-aught beautiful liner brush that makes perfect strokes. Load the tip of my Radical Round with Hauser medium green, half, and half pistachio mint. So when I press down to create those tiny little leaves, I get a variegated leaf. You can whip these out rather quickly, and the speed on this video is increased. So this is not real time. But once you get your brush loaded correctly, you can go in and just touch and pull, create those leaves very quickly, and they'll just be darling. It's a super easy way, instead of painting them one color and having to go back and shade everything. Just press and pull out, and you've got those beautiful leaves that are just great shape. And look how quickly you can lay those in. I reload often. Don't let your brush get muddy. If you have the paint all mixed together, it's not going to work. So even if you have to stop every now and then, clean your brush, and reload, it's worth it because you want them to turn out very nice. Just kind of filling in where it looks a little bit empty. You don't want floating flowers. You don't want areas where there's no greenery whatsoever. Take a look at it and see if you like the way it looks, and give it a quick dry. And the heat tool I'm using is so nice. It's just a very quiet drying tool, and it does a super quick job at drying the paint. Now that I've got the leaves on, I can go back and I can stencil again, and you can see where the leaves are on top of the flowers. I want them behind the flowers. So now I can go in and put my second coat on there, cover up the leaves, get a really nice opaque flower. Take a look at it. You'll know if it needs another coat, but I only did 2 coats on these and it covered up really well. It pushes those leaves in the background where they belong. This adds a little more dimension. And we'll just repeat this to cover all of the flowers. And it's kind of funny because you have to remember, most of the time I try to keep my stencil facing straight up so that I don't have to go back and try to figure out. But a couple times I twisted my stencil around and it didn't quite match up. So it's kind of the match game to see which way it was facing, to get it just perfectly lined up. So yeah, if you make a note to keep your stencil facing one direction, when you go back a second time to line them up, it's not quite as much of a challenge. And I believe on this second coat, everything covered up really well. Pick up a little white on that purple stencil brush and tap that in. Add those lighter purple flowers without having to get another color out. I don't have a lot of paint. It's just a little bit of paint on that brush, and that's kind of my motto. A little bit of paint makes a big difference. Okay, so everything, and I'm checking it now just to make sure that I have good coverage. Getting rid of some more of those graphite lines that I missed. This is the Mono Zero eraser. It's just a teeny tiny eraser. Lets you go in there very easily and remove tiny lines without messing anything up. I'm getting some wild berry on the toe of my 1/4 inch angle to go in and shade each one of those petals. And you notice I kind of do an up and down float. It's not a straight float. And I'm doing each petal individually. So it's wiggle, 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 and wiggle, wiggle for each petal. And what that does, it creates a little bit of looks like veining down each petal. It's just very quick, very easy, and really impressive. And that's what we like. Just like that, I have added tremendous dimension to those flowers very, very easily. Dioxazine purple, and be careful with this color. It is super, super intense. You don't need much at all. If you have trouble with it being too strong, just tone it down with a little bit of that purple petal, and it kind of makes it not quite as intense. I'm using just that same wiggle float to pull some of that floating down into each one of those petals. Because the flowers are smaller, if you want to bump down to the 1/8 inch awesome angle, some prefer that. I just had the brush in my hand and went with it. But you can see now how these flowers are starting to stand out. They went from very plain and very flat. Now we have that really nice shading down around the middle. And it's much easier for me to just spin that surface around as opposed to try to twist my arm around each flower. I'm going to dip dot the center with banana cream. Didn't like that dot. I thought it was too small, so I used the handle end of my brush to get a fatter dip dot. For the smaller flowers, I'm going back in with my handle of my brush to lift out excess paint. That removes some of that doming, and it makes the flower center much flatter. It'll dry quicker, and it will not have that big bump on it. And I did just use a stylus or a handle of a smaller brush to do the little flowers with. And that will take a little bit to dry because that paint is, by being a dip dot, a little bit thicker. So give it a quick dry. I think to paint this, it took me about an hour from start to finish. With the video, I did speed it up so it would go a little bit quicker. But it's really not a complicated project. A little bit of brightening in the center of the flowers. I'm adding Snow White dip dots, just some little tiny sprinkles, just to brighten it up. A little bit of paint makes a big difference, and these are the little touches you can do that aren't really big notices, but they do make a big difference. I think it looks pretty good. Trying to decide at this point whether or not I need to add anything else to it to balance it out and make it look good. If you like my video, take a minute to hit like and subscribe to my channel. If you have any comments, I will take a look at them and get back with you. This is the 0.01 micron black pen, just doing a loose outline. And what I mean by loose is that it's not exact. Outlining the leaves, the petals, the flower centers on the leaves, adding the vein work. Earlier I painted little stems with my liner. Really don't have to do that. You can do that with your micron. And with each petal on the flower, I'm adding a couple of lines to enhance that veining. This line work just makes such a huge difference. And what it does, it's going to really, especially when you're working with pastel colors, it's really going to separate and lift them out. You can see what a big difference it makes already. I had trouble with my hand kind of dangling off the edge of that lid. And so I grabbed another lid so that my hand was at the same level with the lid. Makes it so much easier to create smooth lines. So, you know, if you're having trouble, especially on the edge of that lid, find something to lift your hand up, maybe a little book or something to make it even so you don't have to reach up over the edge of that lid. And it sounds like it shouldn't make a big difference, but boy, it makes it so much easier. Isn't that amazing what a difference that pen makes? Doesn't take a lot of time and so much fun to do that little bit of line work on there. And because it doesn't have to be perfect, it kind of takes the stress off of it. And I found out on a lot of those really small, tiny leaves, I was wishing they were a little more perfect shape. Well, here you go. You can just get the exact shape you want. Sharpen those tips up. And on the ears, I did a little bit of a wiggle line. I wanted him to look fuzzy. So I didn't do a straight line. I just kind of did a little bit of a wavy line so it looks like fur and down his ears. And just kind of enjoyable, excuse me, to outline each one of these because it makes such a huge difference. It's just darling. If you want to, you could use the micron pen to do the eyebrows, the eyelashes, the whiskers. They're really great to work with. So if you have any comments, make your comments below. I'll list all the supplies I used, and you can reference them below as well. Look what a difference it makes on those little pointy leaves. I think that's the one I was most impressed with, how it just went from kind of okay to wow, that looks great. And it's funny because you do these and you look back and you go, oh, I missed that one and I missed that one over there. So it probably would be easier to start on one side and just work your way all the way around the other. You would not miss as many. Micron pen is a great tool because because it will not reactivate with water, which means after it's dry you can brush varnish over it. It's not going to bleed and run. It looks really nice. I'm looking at it, this is where I'm thinking I need to add one more flower because it's kind of empty there at the bottom. So again, it's not finished until you decide it's finished. Not a big deal, put a little purple flower in there. And I'm just gonna do that real quick, add some little petals or little leaves around it so it looks like I meant to add it. And then we'll see, I forgot another leaf right there. If you do not put a sealer on the paper mache box, I will warn you, it's like a big sponge. It will soak up so much of your paint. It's unbelievable. So make sure you do take time to seal it. This is a great little box for putting candy in, special eggs. You could, I didn't finish the inside, but you could definitely do some fun things with it. Put little pictures or secret little treasures in there. Now I'm just going back and adding that same dioxazine purple, a little bit of shading around the center and pulling it up each one of those little petals. Add a dip dot of banana cream. Give that a quick dry. Again, this heat tool is just fantastic. I've had mine for several years. I use it every single day and it's just fantastic. Nice and quiet. And when I teach classes, I can run the dryer and talk at the same time. Outline each one of those little petals down there in that little lavender flower. And add those little leaves in there. Oh, how cute. Didn't take long to get this far, and this would be a great little design. You could enlarge it and you could put it on other surfaces as well. I thought it looked a little bit too plain, so I'm just grabbing some thin Snow White, tapping it on a brush to get a little bit of a splatter. I don't want it to look like snow, so I'm just kind of splattering it around to brighten up the flowers and the leaves and a little bit in that blue background. I don't want any on his face. However, if you do get some on his face, you can take a damp cotton tip swab, just kind of touch up if you get it somewhere you don't want it to be. Very workable. And I just need to brighten that little highlight on his nose just a little bit more. And I went back and fixed his eyebrow. I did use the micron pen. I decided to keep the side edge of the lid very simple, and I'm painting it with Aqua Sky. This is going to go so much easier than the the colors I used to base coat the bunny and the sky with, because it's a much stronger blue and it's going to cover much better. However, it's still going to take 2 coats. So don't try to get it all done in one. Make sure you get that bottom rim covered too, because that looks messy if it's not. I took a couple bottles of paint and I just cradled that lid right on the paint. The bottom part I painted spa blue, and I'm using a bigger paintbrush. You can use your oval wash. It just puts it on a little bit smoother. The larger brush you have, the less brush strokes you're going to be using, and it's going to be a lot smoother. So go ahead and break out those big brushes to cover that. I didn't paint the bottom of the box for the video just for time reasons, but I would pull that sticker off and paint the bottom as well. Again, paint that top rim, because when they open the box, they're going to see that top rim. But inside, you could personalize it, put a picture in there. You could cover it with paper. There's a lot of different things you could do, and just about the right size for a nice Easter egg or chocolate bunny. A little bit of Easter grass, some jelly beans. I can think of a lot of things to put in that box. You could also put names on it. You could put the date on it. Put another quick coat of aqua sky. That's such a pretty color, really a nice turquoise. And that's the color we used when I shaded around the ears and the bunny head. So it really complements that top nicely. Second coat on the bottom of the box, and I apologize, I was almost off the screen. However, just a quick, simple base coat. Just make sure that it's covered nice and smooth. If there's ridges or bumps on the box when you're painting it, if you don't get those smoothed out, you're going to have ridges and bumps on the box when it dries. So take your time and get a nice coverage. You want it to look good. It doesn't have to take a lot of time to create something that looks really nice when you're finished. You can dry it quickly with the heat tool. And while I decided I was going to add just some simple dip dots of Snow White around the edge, and you can almost see me doing that. But I just did some random dip dots all around the side edge. With all the busyness on the top, the side needs to be just a little simple. I thought it would be fun too. You could just wrap a pretty ribbon around it and tie a bow on the side edge. Would be really cute. You do want to make sure that the paint is nice and dry, because if it's wet when you're trying to work with, it's going to be a mess. I had that flower stencil and I thought, oh, I think it would look kind of nice to just stencil simple flowers on there. So I'm using Aqua Sky and my Spectacular stencil brush to add just a soft, it's kind of a blue on blue. Stenciling on a rounded surface is a little challenging, but I did find out that it's much easier to do small sections instead of trying to do, wrap it all the way around and do a large area at one time. So I just kind of cradled it between 2 fingers, my thumb and my finger, did a small section and then kind of moved forward. Because it is just a design and not specific, I didn't have to worry about it being perfect. And I could just do sections and add flowers where they needed to be to fill it in. So that is the bottom of the box, and I think it turned out really cute. So thank you for joining me today. Be sure to hit like button and subscribe to my channel on YouTube. All supplies are available at Cupboard Distress.